Michael Oren is former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and a former member of the Knesset. Ambassador Oren, thank you for being here this morning.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Lots going on today. I want to start, if I can, with this decision by Prime Minister Netanyahu to visit Gaza with the troops. What do you make of that decision to do that during a truce?
Well, I think it's important that an Israeli leader would go and visit the troops at the front line. I think that's true in any country in a war, certainly a war that is essential for our national survival. I think probably politically it's important for Mr. Netanyahu because there's a tremendous amount of criticism of him. His poll numbers are, how should I say this, rather abysmal. So, it's important for him politically to show himself up. Israel is a country, it's not like, say, the United States where there's a commander-in-chief who's the president. The commander-in-chief of the Israel Defense Force is actually the government. And Israel goes to war on a consensual basis. You have to have a tremendous amount of legitimacy in the government in order to send the army, which is a citizen's army, off to fight. So the legitimacy of the prime minister, the person who heads that coalition, is extremely important for our ability to fight.
So we are now into day 3 of this truce, Ambassador Oren. It seems as though another group of hostages has been released. How do you feel about how this is unfolding? There was that blip yesterday with some of the aid not getting through, but Egypt intervened and it went ahead. How do you feel about how the truce is unfolding?
I think I probably speak to the vast majority of Israelis in saying that our feelings are mixed, quite naturally mixed. On one hand, we're delighted that these hostages are reunited with their families, and we hope for the further release of hostages, not just the 50 that are scheduled, but for all of the hostages to be reunited with their families. On the other hand, we understand we're dealing with Hamas. It's a terrorist organization. It's not an honest negotiator. It's not going to negotiate in good faith. It's always going to sort of move those goalposts whenever it can. That's the glip you were talking about, the glip.
Yeah.
And we'll try to, always try to take advantage. Hamas conducts terror not just physically, but it also conducts terror emotionally. Imagine what these parents and family members went through yesterday. It will divide family members. It will free a child, but not the mother. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of emotional terrorism. The idea at the end of the day for Hamas, and this we have to keep in mind as part of the ambivalence, is that Hamas wants a ceasefire. It wants a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire. A ceasefire for Hamas means it wins. It means it gets away with mass murder. It means it reorganizes itself and prepares to launch the next attack, which is precisely what its leaders said it's going to do. They're not hiding that intention. And so we have this very difficult, almost impossible task of doing two things at the same time, releasing the hostages and destroying Hamas. Where Hamas won't release all the hostages, of course, because once it does that, we'll be able to, for example, flood those tunnels, the 300 miles of tunnels under Gaza, and finish off Hamas. So it's extremely delicate, sort of painful balancing act that Israel has to do, all the while resisting international pressure, and I would say growing international pressure, to give Hamas that permanent ceasefire.
We are just getting word, CNN is reporting, Ambassador, that the 4-year-old Israeli-American Abigail, who was mentioned by President Biden on Friday, has been released. What does that indicate to you, that the idea that obviously she's a child, so that was part of the intention to release, but the fact that she is also American, I would imagine would be significant for the Biden administration.
It is first of all, I want to say I know that family very well, old family friends, and I'm moved and delighted. Okay, if I sound a little choked up, I'm very moved and delighted. It's important for the president. The president has gone out on a limb here. He's gone out on a limb generally for Israel and is paying a political price for it. His numbers are collapsing among especially young Democratic voters who disapprove of his handling of this, but he has remained absolutely steadfast in opposing these calls for a permanent ceasefire. He understands that would basically be a victory for Hamas and perhaps even the end of Israel. He understands that. But he's trying to also gain some credit, and he went out on the limb and helped him to negotiate this hostage release. And he hadn't really received any quid pro quo from Hamas, which is precisely was, again, Hamas's goal. It's not just a physical terrorist, it's also a diplomatic terrorist. It's trying to drive a wedge between Israel and the United States, and was doing that by not releasing any of the Americans. So now Hamas gets a good headline by releasing Abigail. It's that's the price of this hostage deal. But I think it also maybe gives a little bit of help to Joe Biden, who has really paid a political price for standing by Israel.
Do you think that this truce could go longer? Obviously, that is part of the deal. If hostages continue to be released, Israel will not strike back. Do you think that it could go longer? And would that be ultimately a good thing, the beginning of something that would stop the conflict?
Well, let's play it out to the end. Israel's offered an extra day of ceasefire for every 10 hostages released. And they are equivalent. We'll have been on the end of the ceasefire, about 170 hostages still in captivity in Gaza. So you can say how many days of a ceasefire that's going to amount to, say just another over 2 weeks of a ceasefire, which Hamas is going to want to play out. But at the end of the day, Hamas is not going to give up all the hostages. Again, the hostages are going to be their get out of Gaza free card. And even if they give up the last, even if there were a permanent ceasefire and all the hostages were released, Israel would still have to continue its fight against Hamas. And I'll explain. It's not very complicated. We have about 250,000 internal refugees in Israel. People have been forced out of their homes because they cannot go back to their border communities because of Hamas. If Hamas just reconstitutes itself and it prepares to launch the next strike, large swaths of Israel will become uninhabitable. We have no tourism right now, almost no foreign investment. Hamas will have basically won and maybe even pose an existential threat to the state. I honestly, personally don't know how we survive this if Hamas is continuing to rule Gaza. And so even, if in the best of all worlds, Hamas would release all the hostages and we would offer them a deal, and I'm saying this, I'm not an ambassador anymore, so this is my personal opinion.
Sure.
We would offer the deal similar to the deal that we offered the PLO in Beirut in 1982, which is, get on a boat, go somewhere, go to someplace horrible like Libya or Algeria and give us all the hostages. We'll let you go for free. We won't sink the boat. And that would be probably the best outcome anybody could hope for. It's too early to tell whether that outcome is in any way possible.
Do you think that the release of the hostages changes what's going on inside Israel? Because obviously there was an enormous amount of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to do more here. People were very fed up. I think that's fair to say. Does it change the way the people inside Israel respond to what's happening?
Yes, it does. It's an excellent question because Hamas, they may be evil, but they're not stupid. And here they've created a precedent of Israel agreeing to a ceasefire. It'll be difficult, not impossible, but difficult for Israel to resume the fighting after these 5 days. But also within Israel, Hamas has succeeded in putting wedges within Israel itself. So keep in mind, say 50 hostages get out, but there's 170 remain. Those families are going to go to the government and say, wait a minute, you already agreed to a ceasefire to get those hostages out. Agree to more ceasefires to get them out. So it's creating a wedge within Israel itself. My training is as an historian, and looking back through history, I can't find another example of a country that had to make these type of decisions. They're just excruciating all the time. And there's no good decision. There's only a less catastrophic decision, literally. And, we'll be writing about this for many, many decades to come. Right now, there's no good outcome. There's only a less agonizing and terrible outcome.